Hello everyone, I'm Angshuman Dutta and my apologies for this being through a recording. Nevertheless, I will start now. Designing space, outer wilds and its non-linear immersion. Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction writer, contends in his third adage or law that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Clarke was talking about the future and its imaginative possibilities. Much revered modernist author Virginia Woolf, in her 1928 novel Orlando, a Biography, makes a similar connection, and I quote, "Then she got into the lift for the good reason that the door stood open and was shot smoothly upwards. The very fabric of life now," she thought as she rose, "is magic. In the 18th century, we knew how everything was done, but here I rise through the air, I listen to voices in America, I see men flying, but how it's done, I can't even begin to wonder." So my belief in magic returns. Taking it from there, video games, quite the pinnacle of immersive imagination expressed through technology, are inherently magical in nature. Tec- Technically, video games are simply an interaction between humans and graphic pixels on a computer screen. In games, we have the player surrogate within the game, which is the game avatar, and the game world. The relationship between these three plays out in the gamescape, creating magic. Video games are deceptive by principle. The players are brought into a world that does not exist, but having been brought into it, the game world only functions if the player suspends their disbelief and believe in the existence of this world. This is a convoluted way of saying a simple fact. We are aware that the stories video games are illusory in nature, and we are willingly choosing to believe. It sounds like a fantastical statement. They exist because we believe in their existence. This is why instances like glitches and bugs are a jarring sensation for a player to experience. It inadvertently jolts the players back into reality, acting contrary to what the game developer wants. But this willing suspension has to be elicited, guided, and sustained by the way the game is designed. Much like a magic trick, it is up to the developers to decide when to show what and why. Otherwise, the curtain falls and the act fails. In Why Game Designers Should Study Magic, Kumari, Deteding, and Kun states that magic shares uncanny similarities with games. They both revolve around the same core experiential qualities like engagement, immersion, or escapist fantasy, making magic a unique lens to study the underlying principles. The idea of camping in space is what becomes the underlying drive in Mobius Digital's 2019 indie game Outer Wilds. This notion is intricately brought out in the poster of the game, the screen of the menu, the starting point of each gameplay, and the main ending of the game. The idea of sitting beside a campfire, roasting a marshmallow, and at times playing an instrument connects each of these events. The player is an unnamed astronaut on the day of their first launch into space. The game provides the player with a contained solar system to explore, filled with five planets all going around the sun. The player, henceforth known as the traveler in the game, follows the space steps of five others before them, part of the Outer Wilds ventures, who had already left to scour the solar system, looking for adventure and answers. Once aboard the spaceship, which feels more like a glorified tin box lander, the player can roam around the solar system. There is no linear way at approaching the game. Players can visit any planet they want to, in any order they feel like. The general aim would be to collect information and slowly piece together the narrative. In taking a heuristic approach, the developers also ensure that the players have to learn the basic mechanics and rules of the game. The players are left without any clear cut clues, and the only way to learn seems to be by doing something, failing, repeating till one gets it right. It is only when the player gets up in space, gently floating and looking around, that they get their first taste of wonder and magic. The protagonist is part of a species that have barely mastered the basics of spaceflight. They joke about the crashing and burning of the spaceship, and yet the player is aboard it, separated from a sea of nothingness by merely a few inches of aluminium. You're intentionally dwarfed and made to feel almost powerless against the terrifying vacuum and the unknowable vastness of space. It is a visual that only a minuscule number of humans in history has ever seen. Outer Wilds encapsulates the magic of that moment beautifully. So, how does Outer Wilds further create this magic circle, borrowing the term from Johann Huizinga? A primary point of focus while analyzing this game from that perspective will be to look at how each planet is designed. Each planet of Outer Wilds is uniquely built to evoke a sense of awe and surprise within the players. Brittle Hollow is in fact a planet with a volcanic moon. The moon spews out rocks that are crashing onto the planet's surface, slowly breaking it and pushing it into the black hole that is at the center of the planet. The hourglass twins are binary planets connected by a column of sand that seesaws between the planets, thus, the hourglass effect. One of the scariest moments in the game has been when one encounters the sand column. Visually, it is massive, and the sound bellows and grates into the ears as the falling sand sweeps the player off their feet and throws them into the other planet. In Giant's Deep, once players get through the murky atmosphere, they are greeted with the tumultuous seas, raging tornadoes, and little islands that they have to explore. Periodically, the tornadoes and little tornadoes which move around, by the way, will throw these islands along with the player up into the sky. For the first time, it is sure to catch the player unaware as they suddenly find themselves shot upwards and then free falling with the whole island. The scariest part of the game resides in Dark Bramble, the remnants of a planet infected from within by a vine like growth. Within this planet, in milky space and an sound, resides the anglerfish. All you can see is the little light bulb before they eat you because you made too much noise. Information regarding these events is clarified in different parts of the solar system within Nomai ruins and their conversations. These unique designs create a sense of magic for players to immerse themselves in. Of course, there, of course, these demand a willing suspension of disbelief. A black hole at the center of a planet or sand falling from one planet to another. These are impossible worlds created within the diegetic gamescape that players get to interact with. David Malik writes in a blog post that games require a willing suspension of disbelief from the player, since game designers want players to become immersed in the game, believing that the characters they are portraying and the situations they are in are real. The purest sense of this imaginative splendor in Outer Wilds is at the end of the time loop as the end times begin to play. For the first time, it is a bewildering event for the player to experience. They are trying to make sense of a world that is not really helping them, where nature is uncompromising and mistakes are severely punished. At the 22-minute mark in the loop, the sun, which will be growing bigger and turning redder all the while, will shrink in size, turn blue, and go supernova, exploding and killing everyone. The first time it happened for me, I let out a little yelp, unsure what to make of it, before I woke up again at the campfire. With each occurrence, the sense of dread lessened. Even though the time loop meant I am technically not dying, I had to hurry and complete whatever I was doing so I don't have to come back there again the next time. Supernova creates a sense of dread, a sense of sublime even, and the first time, a sense of surprise. The player does not know why it is happening, but there is an unfathomable beauty in watching it blow up. For the next part, I would focus on the music and the final performance in the game. The choice of the instruments, drums, banjo, flute, harmonica, reflects the developer's idea of camping in space. The tapestry of the game story is filled with planets weaving their own distinct music aligned to their aesthetics. Andrew Prolow, the creator of the pieces, talks at length about using folk instruments and simple campfire melodies to evoke a sense of nostalgia, a callback to games that used simple motive. Whereas elsewhere for the nomads who talk through their technology, he said, and I quote, I wrote a melody and textures to resemble a piano being ripped apart in space. Each of the members of the Outer Wilds ventures have an instrument that the players can hear through a signal scope in space. Each of the instruments in the game is playing a variation of the same song that gets pieced together at the end, titled Travelers, a commentary on the theme of connection and making meaning out of the parts. The gestalt of the video game encompasses all the different tunes that you have come across in your gameplay. The player gathers all the travelers around a campfire among the woods in a dreamscape which transcends life and death. The endgame is already triggered by then. You ask each of them separately, and as they start, the whole of the theme comes into play. The player becomes the conductor of the music piece. The final performance of the music in the game is beyond time or space, existing just within itself. I found the contrasting nature of the simple instruments against the backdrop of the impending death of everybody as an undertone for the whole game. The inevitability of death can only be acknowledged, and it was all about playing one last time all together around the campfire. As the piece ends, so does the game, with everyone's death followed by the birth of another system of life. The final scene after the credits is again that of a campfire in the woods. In the eye where this performance takes place, time ceases to exist. Much like the game world, it is seemingly a construct that the protagonist wills into existence before accepting their own mortality. The game has been a long and arduous journey of failure and repetition and death, which was just a reset. When the player takes apart the artifact that has been powering the time loop and then rushes through space accompanied by a haunting piece of melody trying to reach the Nomai spaceship deep within dark brambles, that is when the realization dawns upon the player. The slightest mistake will result in death with a capital emphasized D. It will be game over. But during the performance in the dreamscape, the player is now all but aware that their death is certain. If I may be so bold, the identity of the player in the real world is overwhelmed by the collective existential dread and loss of this moment. Numerous Reddit posts will support this statement. The, that Outer Wilds is a clever bit of a video game design is of no doubt. The designers conjured magic within the unique planet styles and distinct gameplay mechanics. From the quantum rocks to using the jellyfish to get through an electric field, the game does a magnificent job of creating an imaginary world for the players to lose themselves in. The tightly wounded nature of the game, its 22 minutes time loop, ensures that the player is kept on their toes with a sense of mystery and intrigue. It throws the player into an unforgiving, unknown, visually terrifying world bound with death at every step. But nature is not malevolent here. In Outer Wilds, there is no evil to fight and defeat, no combat, no skill points, no upgrades. The very nature of the gameplay is to create a world that is both imaginative and punishing. The magic is sustained through the intrigue created by the story and its nonlinear progression. You slowly piece together each piece of the puzzle before making sense of the narrative. But the magic persists even beyond the story in the visual and the oral elements of Outer Wilds. It is a game of exploration and curiosity, marked with these moments of sublime aesthetics and moments of awe and magic experienced visually. and orally about life, death, and everything in between. Thank you.